Today I'm going to read and explain as best I can to you parts of one of my favorite spiritual texts, which is called the Shobogenzo by the Zen teacher Dogen, who is the founder of a school of Zen in Japan called Soto Zen. He lived in the 13th century, so it's a long time ago. But he was a really, really significant figure for Zen in Japan. And he was an iconoclast. He studied Zen when he was a bit younger in Japan, became dissatisfied with the instruction at the monastery there, decided to move to China to practice what he thought was a more authentic form of Buddhism, because Zen Buddhism comes originally from China. Buddhism started in India, then the Chinese adapted Indian Buddhism to something that was more pragmatic for a more agricultural population, Buddhism in China became something that was more everyday, more for the everyman and less for an educated elite. So it became less philosophical and sort of abstract the way that it was in India, and it became more pragmatic and about the direct experience of awakening in China, and that was sort of the beginning of Zen. And then eventually that Zen made its way to Japan through the Chinese, and it was, how do you explain this? In Japan at the time, China was seen as sort of that center of culture because it was the origin of Japanese Zen, was China. So Dogen said, okay, I'm going to China to find a purer version of this than I'm finding in the schools here. Studied in China for 5 years and then moved back to Japan and started eventually teaching at a monastery, started teaching this style of Zen, of sitting in Zazen is what it's called. So just sitting and letting awakening arise. I'm paraphrasing here. I'm sure that Dogen would take issue with some of the ways that I say things because I'm speaking to a modern audience, so I'm not going to be doctrinally correct about everything that I'm saying here, but I'm going to do what I can to interpret a text that is very, very old and very traditional and translated from old Japanese, so it's pretty obscure and opaque in a lot of areas, but I'm going to try to sort of make it a little bit more accessible to people. So it was written in fascicles, which are like installments, lots of different small chapters that he wrote, and these were written for monks. So it's pretty, it assumes a devoted practice from the person who's reading it. It assumes that a person is already very invested in spiritual realization, and that this is sort of a way to uncover something deeper. And what I have here is called the heart of Dogen's Shobogenzo. So it's not even all the fascicles, it's just some of the most appreciated, globally most commented upon now that this is recognized. Dogen's work is recognized globally as a significant spiritual and literary and sort of artistic creation. So I'm reading from a fascicle called Uji, which in English has been translated here as being time. The time being means time, just as it is being, and being is all time. Although you never measure the length or brevity of the 12 hours, their swiftness or slowness, you still call them the 12 hours. As evidence of their going and coming is obvious, you do not come to doubt them. So we are all aware of time. We all know that time is happening. That's the basic idea so far. But even though you do not have doubts about them, that is not to say you know them. So we see time moving, we see things changing, but what is time? Since a sentient being's doubting of the many and various things unknown to him are naturally vague and indefinite, the course his doubtings take will probably not bring them to coincide with this present doubt. Nonetheless, the doubts themselves are, after all, none other than time. So we're going to think about all sorts of things. We're going to doubt and wonder about all sorts of things. But we probably won't come to be specifically focused on the nature of time. How many people really meditate deeply and question what is time? It's not so popular. And yet he says all of these doubts, everything that we wonder about, is still time. What does that mean? I'm going to have to keep reading. We set the self out in array and make that the whole world. We must see all the various things of the whole world as so many times. These things do not get in each other's way, any more than various times get in each other's way. We set the self out in array and make that the whole world. So, taking this out of the context of the rest of the work, it needs to be explained that the self here is the awakened self. It's the realization of oneself as consciousness, not as the individual form, not as just an individual person, but more essentially as the consciousness, as the awakeness underlying you, underlying all things. So when it says we set the self out in array and make that the whole world, it's pointing to the realization that what the self is the consciousness that moves all things, that is everything. That's not to say that all things are conscious, that they're having an experience, that they're aware in the sense that we are or that animals are, but that they're all fundamentally rooted in this consciousness, that the base of them, the essence of them, is consciousness, or what would be called in Buddhism, suchness. It just is. It is so. It is such. It's suchness. You can't describe it. You just become deeply aware and feel this quality of suchness, of aliveness, which is what you are in all things. So when we set the self out in array, we see that this self is everything. These things do not get in each other's way any more than various times get in each other's way. Because of this, there is an arising of the religious mind, the spiritual mind, at the same time. And it is the arising of time of the same mind. So it is with practice and attainment of the way. We set ourselves out in array and we see that. Such is the fundamental reason of the way, that our self is time. So there's a focus on non-duality here, that all these, when Dogen says time here, he's referring to all the different aspects of time, everything that changes, all the ephemeral circumstances, things that come into existence and go out of existence. That's what makes up time, is the arising and subsiding of things, and the constant change gives us something that we see is changing, whether it's moving forward, however you want to say it. That's how we're aware of time, because things are always changing. If everything were always static, there would be no time. We would have nothing to talk about. There would be no movement. But because there's movement and because there's change, there's time. And so what Dogen is pointing to is that all of these changes, everything that's shifting and changing, which includes ourselves on the relative level, our human form that's aging and our preferences are changing, that itself, all of the form, is itself that awakened consciousness. There's not a separation between the pure, the aware, and the unconscious, the form that's ephemeral. There's not an ultimate separation between eternal awareness and temporal forms. They are actually one and the same. Since such is its fundamental reason, we must study and learn that myriad phenomena and numberless grasses, things, so grasses here are a way to refer to all forms, all things. Myriad phenomena and numberless things exist over the entire earth, And each of these grasses and each of the forms exists as the entire earth. These comings and goings are the commencement of Buddhist practice. When you have arrived within this field of suchness, it is a single grass, a single form. The forms are understood and not understood. The grasses are grasped and not grasped. So, again, when you see that all of these things coming and going are eternal in the sense that their substance, their deep nature is that eternal consciousness, and at the same time, no thing is eternal in itself in the form sense. So form is going to constantly shift, like bubbles bursting and coming into being. It's all very quick in a way. But the essence that keeps throwing up all these forms, creating all these forms, is constant. And it's really that essence that's the nature of all the forms, even though on the surface level, on the form level, they're all shifting. And when you have arrived within this field of suchness, it is a single grass, a single form. So this field of awakening is one, even though its manifestations are endless. And there's a particular line here that each of the things and each of the forms exists as the entire earth. So because each thing is undivided consciousness, is that awakened self, ultimately, each thing is like a veiled manifestation of awakening. In that sense, each thing in itself is eternity, is the whole thing. Even the most unconscious thing, even the thing that is least self-aware, is still a manifestation of that total awareness. So even the least enlightened thing, even a rock, is awakened consciousness in its most essential nature. It's not awakened to itself, the rock is not self-aware, but it is still a manifestation of that infinite and eternal being that we as humans can come to perceive as we look within. We have the capacity to realize ourselves as this field of awakening, as Dogen calls it, this field of suchness. And in that field of suchness, you understand everything and you don't understand everything, because you understand it essentially, but you can't really comprehend its coming and going. It's so impossible to understand, to really grasp. Of course, you can't grasp things that are ephemeral. How can you hold on to something that's not going to last? It dissolves. As the time right now is all there ever is, each being time is without exception entire time. A grass being and a form being are both times. Entire being, the entire world, exists in the time of each and every now. Just reflect, right now, is there an entire being or an entire world missing from your present time or not? This is a very simple reflection, but very profound. Right now, in this moment that I'm speaking, everything in the entire infinite universe exists right now. So somewhere billions of miles away, something is happening on some star, some movement of gas, some movement of flame, things that I can't even imagine. Every person on the earth who's alive exists right now. They're doing something right now. Every animal, every tree, every flower, every molecule, every atom, every single thing is right now. It is always right now. There is no other existence of anything ever except in this moment right now, or this moment 2 weeks from now. Everything always exists in this field, this awake field of now. I'm going to jump a bunch here. Dogen goes on to talk about how we often think that enlightenment is getting somewhere else, that awakening is reaching a state that we're not in now. And he uses a way to describe it, that moving into awakening is like climbing a mountain or crossing a river. And he says, when we're not so awake, when we're not very deeply aware, when we hold an unenlightened view, we think that the other side of that river, awakening, enlightenment, is somewhere other than where we are right now, that it's in another place, another time. But as you wake up more, you come to see that even that unawakened state before you cross the river was right now, is right now. There's no other place. When you awaken, you're not going somewhere else. You're not becoming something that you're not already. All of your unconsciousness, all of your unawakened nature, all of your essential ignorance, the parts of you that don't realize and experience this deep field of presence, are here right now. They're nowhere else. So there's nowhere that you're getting to. You're just realizing what's already there, what you already are. So enlightenment is not on the other side of a river. There is an internal path that you have to move into. You do go through a process of awakening. But that process of awakening is just realizing more essentially what's already here, what you already are. You're not becoming anything extraordinary or special. At the same time, the realization of that deep awakening presence is extraordinary in itself, but it's just the nature of things. It's not becoming a Superman. You already are a Superman. You just don't realize it, is one way to put that. I'm going to read one last part that I like a lot. I've always found this like nuclear spirituality. It's so powerful. So he says, you think that time is passing. You think that time is just happening around you and passing. But everything in that passing time is this awakening field of presence. So he says, hence, pine trees are time. So are bamboos. You should not come to understand that time is only flying past. You should not only learn that flying past is the virtue inherent in time. If time were to give itself to merely flying past, it would have to leave gaps. I'm going to read that part again. If time were to give itself to merely flying past, it would have to leave gaps. You fail to experience the passage of being time and hear the utterance of its truth because you learn only that time is something that goes past. So this is, again, a very simple meditation, but very profound. If time is only something that moves and not something that is eternal, it would have to leave gaps. If time is just moving forward, why is there such a continuity? There's no moment in time when you were not there. There was always a person. There's a continuity of time, and that there's always a field of now. There's always a present moment. And that present moment is always where you experience yourself. It's always where you experience life happening, in this present moment. So time is not just something that goes forward independent of us. Time is a movement of form, a movement of comings and goings, of ephemeral happenings within a field of presence, within a continuous, single, awake, alive field of presence. Time is not something outside of us. Time is something within what we are. All of these ephemeral comings and goings exist within the awakened presence, the awakened self that we are. And we don't realize that. We think that we are one of these forms within a world of time. We think that I'm me, this body, this psyche, this story of past and future. And all of these other things are happening outside me in time. That's bigger than I am. But how is that so if your experience of time is continuous? You're always there. There's a consciousness that's connecting all time together in your own experience, but you just don't realize it. So if you look deeply into what's continuous, what holds all time together for you, you come to realize that that continuity is consciousness, that it's the base of everything, and that actually all of time, all of the movements of things are not outside you. They're not divorced from you. They're happening within this conscious field, this present conscious field that you are. So nothing is separate from you. It's all the same alive being that you are. It's just coming and going in its own way. But its basic nature is that consciousness that you yourself experience when you look within. The essential point is every entire being in the entire world is each time an independent time, even while it makes a continuous series. Inasmuch as they are being time, they are my being time. That's kind of what we were just talking about there. Each thing, in a way, is independent in its coming and going on its form level, and yet at the same time, its roots, its essential nature, is just this awakened field in which everything happens. So this is really an extraordinary text. It's kind of pointless to say that, but it's such a deep text, and there are so many layers that I don't want anyone to think that we've just explained and sort of covered what's being said there. There are lots of other dimensions about the nature of time, even in a lot of what I just read, that I'm not really focusing on here. But I definitely recommend reading the Shobogenzo if you're interested in deep spirituality and awakening. I do recommend this translation. I've read other copies. There may be a better one, I don't know, but I love this one. It's called The Heart of Dogen's Shobogenzo. And the translators, I'm not sure how to say these names, but are Norman, Waddell, and Masao Abe. Maybe I've just said that wrong, but I'll put the names in the video information underneath so you can find this translation. It's very concise. You do have to read footnotes because a lot of the language is referring to events that happened, contemporary events at the time, which is what now, over 700 years ago. So you need to understand some of the context. And so it's a little bit of work to read it. But when you do understand that context and you can start to sort of move into what's being said, there's something very piercing and direct about the way that Dogen says things that I really appreciate. So yeah, that is the reading today. And if you don't understand all of the details, it doesn't matter. What Dogen points back to always is just sitting in Zazen, which is letting go of thought, letting go of all the form around you, and just doing nothing, being. So there's nothing really to understand. And even when you sit in being and it feels like nothing's happening, at least according to Dogen, but I feel the same way, I see the same thing. There is a lot that awakens in you if you just sit with the intention of looking into that essential nature. You don't have to feel it happening in the moment. So, at the end of this, just see what is it to sit and be and let go of all of this complicated understanding. Just let those words move in you and let go of them and just sit in that being space.